My never say ma PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV there, see them yopo.
To make it impossible and ungovernable by doing secretly so many ugly things to paint their better opponents rather evil. Anytime they cry wrongdoing, they have done it in the dark already. That is from Berima Kwame and Kuma will join us. Baba refers to 67 years of independence, our airways and mothers give birth on the floors. In our hospitals, the people of Ghana can't eat a single meal a day. Our school children don't have books. In the schools, no good drinking water. For Ghana, yet we have money to celebrate Independence Day. What wicked, corrupt leaders we have. God save Ghana. Those are just some of the messages you're sending us to us via Facebook. A big thank you to you for joining us on those platforms and for joining us on television and on radio. Is the mother of all talk shows, Alaji and Alaji. Mr. Pratt?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to make the point that our current state is not the result of 67 years of independence. Our current state, more or less, is the result of the treachery and betrayal of the people of Ghana, which took place on 24th February 1966. So in our discussions, when we begin to talk about, 67 years of independence, this is where we are, and so on, we deliberately miss the point that there was a downward slide which began on 24th February 1966. If 24th February 1966 had not occurred, this is not where we would be. And I think it's important to make that point. Now, in the discussion of national independence, its value, current state, prospect, and so on, it's important for us to understand what the independence movement was about. What really is the meaning of national independence? Because without that, we would not be able to do a concrete evaluation of the last 67 years, if we want to. Now, I think it's important to understand that our struggle for independence was essentially based on our history, a history of oppression, a history of exploitation, a history of domination, a history of deliberate cultural collapse, and so on. That is why we began the struggle for national independence. We began the struggle for national independence cognizance of the fact that we, the African people, the Ghanaian people, black people, and so on, were virtually considered a beast of burden. We were not treated better than donkeys or horses. We were captured as slaves and made to work for free for others to build the basis of their current prosperity. And when we were captured as beasts of burden, all that those who captured us, slave masters and so on, all that they had to do was to give us sustenance, which enabled us to labor for them. The slave master only gave you enough food and water to sustain body in a manner which would make you till the land for his profits. So we're essentially beasts of burden, like donkeys, like horses, and so on. That's what we were. Now, various struggles took place then. Struggles led by people like Toussaint Louverture, who was the founder of the modern state of Haiti, and so on. There were slave revolts and so on. Okay? Slavery became too expensive for the slave-owning class, for the slave-owning countries and so on. We made it expensive for them because we fought them. And in many cases, we defeated them and so on. We made it an expensive venture. Of course, in addition to our effort to make slavery expensive for them and so on, there was also the Industrial Revolution. They were interested in capturing architects, doctors, you understand, in our society. They were the best slaves. As a matter of fact, when the COVID pandemic came, and there were a lot of discussions about vaccines and so on, do you know one fact which came out? One fact which came out was that vaccination itself, as a medical process, came with the transatlantic slave trade. And that it was the Africans who went there who introduced the European and the American to the art of vaccination as a medical process. So you forget about everything. Just think about what vaccination has done to the world. And the fact that it was a medical process art which was taken from Africa as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. You understand? But we are bound in resources, huge resources. The other time, I was made aware of the fact that if you take Africa, Africa has close to 2/3 of the arable lands in the world. I mean, just imagine it. 2/3 of the arable lands in the world. We have everything. Iron ore, bauxite, gold, aluminium, whatever. You understand? Diamonds, everything. Lithium, everything. Okay. So, the same people, the slave traders, the kings and queens of Europe, who were the masterminds of the slave trade and so on, devised other means of ensuring that they controlled these resources which were embedded in our soils. And that is what led and shaped colonialism, which we struggled against. It's important for us to understand that very clearly. Now, one of the landmarks in our struggle for independence, clear landmarks in our struggle for independence, was the 1945 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester. And now that was a landmark because that is what set the target for African liberation. And that is what drew the roadmap to our salvation. So the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester, in the United Kingdom, to which Kwame Nkrumah was secretary, don't forget that Osadifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was secretary to the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester, which developed the roadmap, for our liberation and prosperity. Now, all these kinds of people, charlatans, political charlatans, and no-gooders, who are shouting at the top of the roof that Nkrumah's role in our independence struggle was minimal, and that it was their uncles and grandfathers who led the independence struggle, must be reminded that the blueprint for national liberation and subsequent development and so on was developed in Manchester in 1945 at the 5th Pan-African Congress, to which Nkrumah was secretary. Don't forget that. Now, what did the 1945 conference, Manchester Conference, decide? The 1945 Manchester Conference decided that national liberation was key. It was a first step towards the liberation of the African people and their future development, national liberation. The need for us to get the power to elect our own leaders, to choose our own leaders. Because we were under colonialism, we could not even choose our own leaders. To choose our own leaders, to determine our path of development, determine our own path of development was crucial. But that these two, our ability to choose our own leaders and to develop our own path, ought necessarily to lead to a situation where we would own our resources. The gold, the diamond, everything will be owned by us. And then secondly, exploited for our benefit. This is the gravamen of the independence movement. The right to choose our own leaders, to determine our own pattern of development, to own our own resources, and to exploit these resources for our own benefit. But the Manchester Conference also came to the conclusion that we cannot continue in our fragments, and that for us to consolidate the gains of the national liberation movement, we needed to unite and build a United States of Africa, not under capitalism, but under the banner of scientific socialism. The resolution is there for everybody to read. You understand? So when Nkrumah came to the Gold Coast, on the advice of Padmore, W.E. Du Bois and others, this is the program he came to implement. Mind you, before 1948, when Nkrumah had been invited by the leadership of the so-called UGCC to become General Secretary and so on, Nkrumah and others had established the West African Students Union, whose objective was not the liberation of the Gold Coast from the colonial yoke, but the liberation of the entire West Africa from the colonial yoke. So Nkrumah's project, by 1945, 1946, 47, 48, was not about independence for Ghana. His project was about the independence of the whole of West Africa. So history teaches us that when Nkrumah was invited to become the General Secretary of the United Gold Coast Convention, he hesitated. He hesitated, one, because he thought that the scope of the UGCC was too limited. Liberation of Gold Coast, when there was the whole of West Africa and the whole of Africa to liberate. He hesitated also because he didn't trust the African emerging bourgeoisie to be truthful in the pursuit of the interests of the African people. It was Padmore, Du Bois, and others who told him that go and take that position. You take that position because if we are able to secure the independence of the Gold Coast, it gives us a foothold in Africa to struggle for the liberation of the whole of Africa, not just the Gold Coast. So it was not by accident that on the eve of independence, Nkrumah declared that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. That was a profound statement. His vision was not Gold Coast. His vision was not West Africa. His vision was the entire liberation of the African people. You understand? And that's very clear. Now, some things happened which are very, very significant. Some may think that they are minor and so on, but for me they are significant. After independence, Nkrumah's government decided that we should have our own currency. The opposition, who today is the new patriotic party, what did they do? They fought, held press conferences and so on, insisting that we should retain the Queen of England's head on our currency. That's a historical fact.
I know that.
Even they didn't want the Queen of England's head to to be removed from our currency. Any wonder we are where we are today? They were so in love with the Queen of England. They loved the Queen of England to bits. To the extent that after independence, they were arguing that we should still keep the Queen of England's head on our currency. Maybe that is not a big shock. Why? These people actually sent a delegation to Westminster to go and argue that we have not learned the ways of the colonialists enough, and therefore we should not be in a hurry to gain independence. They said we should learn the ways of the colonialists enough before we are granted independence. Is there any wonder that we are where we are today? Now, immediately after independence, of course, there are two phases. In fact, three phases of the victories. One is 1951, when after the elections, Nkrumah became leader of government business, partial self-governance. Then, of course, 1957, when we became entitled to use our own flag, to have our own national anthem, and to have our own government, and so on. You understand? When we could appoint our own finance minister and defense minister. Because in 1951, the Ministry of Finance and Defense was still reserved for the colonialists. Okay. By 1957, we had moved a step forward. It was 1960, 1st July 1960, that we became fully independent. You understand? That is when we attained the Republican status. It was in 1960 that we became a fully fledged independent nation. Don't forget that. Now, what is significant? What is significant is that the forces in power today, the forces opposed to Nkrumah, fought against the declaration of our Republican status. Indeed, recently, a poster of J.B. Dankwa has emerged, and I hope that you all have seen it, in which he was urging the people of Ghana not to vote for us to attain the Republican status. Very significant. We can also not forget that the very forces, political and social forces in power today, did not want a unitary government. Their preference was for a federated Ghana, Federal Republic of Ghana.
No, not Federal Republic.
What?
Federation of Traditional Authorities.
Well, whatever you call it. Okay? But their preference was to have a federal state, so that you have Ashanti State with its own president or prime minister or whatever. You have the Northern Territories with their own president or prime minister or whatever. And then you have the coastal states with their own president or prime minister or whatever, and so on. Now, some of them were even opposed to the integration of the Volta region into the Gold Coast project.
All of them were opposed to it.
Percy, I'm not like you. I try to be so very careful so that I don't slip. And that is why I decided to say that some of them. You understand? It was deliberate. Percy, I actually sometimes admire your recklessness. Because you are able to reach levels that ordinary mortals like us cannot reach. And some of the things you say, if I were to say them, Amagadon will reach Amagadon very soon. So I admire you for that. But please don't force me to speak like you. We are different levels. You understand? Dr. David Percy. Hey, doctor. So some of them were actually opposed to the inclusion of the Volta region into modern Ghana. One of them was S.G. Antor, who vigorously campaigned for the Volta region to remain part of Togoland. Now, recently I've heard some who claim that S.G. Antor was not one of them. My brother, historical facts, they are there. If you search, you will find. S.G. Antor was appointed by the Busia administration as Ghana's ambassador to Togo. The Busia administration actually appointed S.G. Antor as Ghana's ambassador to Togo, and so on. But you see, after independence, Nkrumah embarked on a clear program of Africanization. And that program of Africanization was important because slavery and colonialism, one of its main objectives, if not main byproduct, was to sow seeds of inferiority complex in the African and the Ghanaian. Okay? I'm a little old today. A little old. Fairly old, you understand? So I know what I am talking about. When we were growing up, there was a club called the Accra Club in the ministries area. If you went to the Accra Club and you saw a black person there, he was either a kebab maker, or a servant, or a driver. The Accra Club, in all its essence, was an European club. You see, the Ridge Hospital, which has now become the Greater Accra Regional Hospital, was in practice a whites-only hospital. It was in the first years of the Nkrumah administration that it became the senior officers' hospital. But before, it was a whites-only hospital. Now, you see the whole Ridge area, all the way up to the castle and so on. More than 90% of the people who stayed there were whites. It was a white colony, complete. Okay? So this promoted the sense of inferiority. The best places and so on were reserved for whites. It promoted the sense of inferiority. In those days, if you went to the hospital, the likelihood was that the doctor who was going to treat you was a white person. In those days, white person. In those days, I went to secondary school, I think in 1966, 67. That's when I went to secondary school. My chemistry teacher was a white man. My biology teacher was white. You understand? We were privileged because we had a white man who was Ghanaian, F.K. Boy and so on. There were schools which had whites as head teachers and head mistresses. So imagine the conflict of inferiority that you grew up with. In those days, you could not play the from in any respectable church. It was considered hidden, African, and so on. From. Today, you go to the Catholic Church and you see these Catholic bishops and so on wearing their cassocks, but with kente motifs. In those days, it was not allowed. You could not, Catholic priest, wear anything which was African. That's idol worship, and so on. Okay? So this complex of inferiority was deeply sown amongst us. It was the Nkrachifo and Uraba who were the nurses and so on. But to attain that status, you had to become a Christian. And to become a Christian meant that you had to adopt an European name. Your African name was not good enough. If you had to join the elite, your name too had to change. Master, aside from the Kwasi Pratt did one thing which was so very remarkable about fighting this complex of inferiority. The fact that he wore a batakari, and the batakari he wore was not what Honorable is wearing now. He wore the sleeveless batakari, which is a batakari for the working people. That's his photograph. In declaring Ghana's independence, he shattered that mentality. Can you imagine if J.B. Dankwa had led the independence struggle and I had the privilege of declaring independence, what he would have wore? Oh, Master, you are too modest. He wouldn't have worn a suit. He would have worn a 3-piece suit with a bowler hat to match. 10 coats and all. Okay? But Nkrumah made a huge statement on that day by wearing the ordinary batakari to break that mold. He made a conscious effort to make the Ghana Armed Forces and Police Ghanaian. The Ghana Armed Forces was led by white people. They commanded the Ghana Armed Forces, and Nkrumah changed that, made sure that Ghanaians were in control. The police service was Africanized. The civil service was Africanized. He saw the need to promote education with African values. And I don't have the statistics with me now. In fact, you can find the statistics in a book called Fight Back, a response to anti-Nkrumah provocations. A book which was authored by the Socialist Forum of Ghana then. The statistics are all there. Enrollment in education increased by more than 3,000%. In the first 3 years of Nkrumah's administration, enrollment in education increased by more than 3,000%. Look, older people would know, from the north would know. You see, the whole of the north, that would include Upper East, Upper West, Northeast, Northern Region, and so on, all of them. Do you know that they have only one middle school? Only one middle school, not secondary school, one middle school in Yendi.
One.
Yes, one. Guda, Kene. So, if you finish primary education, you have to take an entrance examination to go to the middle school. Do you know why the prominent stars of the north, like Suzanne Al-Hassan and so on, why all of them were educated in Achimota and schools in the south? Because the schools didn't exist in the north. And that is why they were educated in Achimota and other places in the south. You understand? They didn't have an opportunity to educate themselves. Now look at the brilliance they exhibited in government. We could have lost all of that. And that is why, initially, it became necessary to introduce a special scholarship scheme for promising students in the north so that they could also have education. Do you know that the opponents of Nkrumah opposed that? Do you know that they opposed that? And the argument was that it gave privileges to people in the north. Can you imagine? And does it surprise you that even as of today, they are blaming Nkrumah for creating people like John Dramani Mahama and others? Do you know that? They are. One of them actually said on radio that if it hadn't been for that man Kwasi Nkrumah, people like John Mahama would have been herding cattle. That is their place. It's Nkrumah who took them out of the vocation of herding cattle, and now they too want to be heads of states. I'm sure all of you heard these statements. And that's a reflection of the context at that time. You understand? That's a reflection of the context at that time, and we should not forget it. Now, if it comes to industrial development, it's another matter. This country was virtually producing nothing. Within 9 years, Nkrumah wanted us to produce our own shoes, our own garments, our own fish and meat. He wanted us to produce everything that we needed under an import substitution program. Come and see how they fought him. Come and see how they fought him. So, in a period of 9 years, Nkrumah actually established more than 400 enterprises for producing the needs of the Ghanaian people. We're producing our own cutlasses. We're producing our own shoes. We're producing our own matches, pine, kania, matches, and so on. And they hated him to the core. So, as soon as the 1966 coup succeeded, one of their prime objectives was to collapse all of those industries and enterprises Nkrumah had established. And that is when privatization started in earnest. Privatization of state enterprises started in earnest. Of course, that project was embraced by the Rawlings-led NDC, PNDC. They continued it with vigor. To the extent that today, we are importing toothpicks. We import toothpicks. We import matches. Matches which are being produced at Kide, we are importing it now. What are we not importing? Chicken parts. We are even importing guinea fowls from Denmark. Ghana is the third largest importer of tomato paste from Germany. That is where we have come after the 1966 coup. Unbelievable. That's where we have come.
That was our destination.
That is where we have come after the 1966 coup. Now, you know, these people, they have been always shouting about how private enterprise somehow is the engine of growth. I look at them and I laugh. You know why I laugh? Because as soon as they capture power, all of them will run from the private enterprise into the state sector. All of them. If the private sector is the engine of growth, stay in your private sector and engine the growth. Watch. All of them are running to the public sector. Even the small public sector that is left. That is where they want. You see this white gown wearing, Bible reciting finance minister. You see him? He was running a company called Data Bank in the private sector, maybe so.
Yes.
As soon as they grabbed power, bam, Ministry of Finance went and sat there. He was appointed. He went and sat there. All the key people in Data Bank now find themselves working in the ministries as advisors and so on. They were running the state, not private enterprise. How can private enterprise be the engine of growth? Does it make sense? Private enterprise operates only on one motive: profit making and profit maximization. That's the only motive. How do you subject the health of your people to an arrangement which is based only on the accumulation of surplus value? How? How do you subject the education of your population to private enterprise whose raison d'etre, is that how they say it?
Raison d'etre.
Raison d'etre. Hey, person, you can speak French too. Whose raison d'etre is making profit. It simply doesn't make sense. Now, Senna, listen to me very, very carefully. You see, they say the private enterprise is the engine of growth. First of all of them are running from the private sector to the state sector. That is number one. Number two, We privatized more than 400 enterprises, state enterprises. We gave them to the private sector to run. Senna, how many of them survived? In the hands of the private sector, how many of them survived?
We have to take them back.
2 out of more than 400. And do you know the ones who survived? Golden Tulip, now Lancaster Hotel, and Movenpick Ambassador. Finish. All the rest collapsed. The magic hands of the private sector could not sustain these state enterprises. They killed them. And we are still parroting this nonsense of the private sector being the engine of growth. Absolute nonsense of the private sector being the engine of growth. What is growth? Because we have been declining systematically from 1966. Declining, going down, sinking from 1966. When we started parroting this nonsense of the private sector being the engine of growth, we haven't moved one step forward. Show me one step forward. Now, even for some of the projects which they have embarked upon, some, for various reasons, they've been compelled to embark on some of the projects. All those projects can be found in the 7-year development plan of Kwame Nkrumah. President Kufuor came, took loans and so on, and built the Bui Dam. Where is the origin of the Bui Dam? It's in the 7-year development plan of Kwame Nkrumah. Not just that. By the time of February 24, 1966, when the coup occurred, Soviet engineers were already on the ground building the dam. Soviet engineers had already arrived in the country to build the dam, and they were expelled. You understand? So even the Bui Dam project that they built was the result of the visionary leadership and thinking of Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and the Convention People's Party. Clear? Okay? Now look at where we are. Look at where we are. And I must show my admiration for Solomon Owusu. His description of the state of Ghana today is apt. You go to buy kinky, boy. You want to send your children to school, boy. Whatever you want to do, boy. You want to buy petrol, hey, stop there. So Solomon captures where we are perfectly. And from his presentation, it is obvious that we are not turning any corner. No. In fact, if there's a corner that this economic model will turn, it's a corner into a ditch. You understand? I get amazed when I hear propagandists of this government talk about the fact that the cedi has now stabilized. Stabilized at what rate? If it is true that it has stabilized. 13 cedis, 60 pesos to $1. When they took office, it was 3 cedis, 40 pesos or so to $1. So if we take the cedi from 3 cedis, 60 pesos or 40 pesos to $1 to more than 13 cedis per dollar, and you look us in the face and say the economy is turning the corner, what do you take us for? You think they're yo-yos? They should stop that thing about turning the corner. Which corner? It's so annoying when you hear these people talking about turning the corner and so on. And they make some claims. You see, when they make these claims, ask them for their own data and examine it, and you'll find something interesting. The other day, I was engaged in a discussion with one of their propagandists who was beating his chest and claiming that, look, they've, when it comes to road construction, they, since independence, have constructed more roads than any government. Senna, and he was reading from a book. So when he finished his presentation, I took the book to try and read what he was reading. Do you know what I found? For the 7-year period, They have only constructed 615 kilometers of new roads. 615 kilometers. That is what they claim is the best record. Do you know what they do? There are different categories of roadworks. Pothole filling, asphalt overlay, construction of bridges and so on. So they have these different categories. So if there's a road which has 25 potholes and they go and fill it, they add it to the figure. If there's an existing road, and in some of the roads, the bitumen on it has been washed away and so on. So they go and put new bitumen on it, they add it. That is how come they get these huge figures. But new roads that they've actually constructed, built, is 615 kilometers. Go and check their own records. They're bamboozling us. They think that if they sit on radio and television and throw figures at us, we will be confused. What they forget is that in this society, there are the David Percy's and others who also somehow, interestingly, have gone to school small and can read, understand, and interpret. My goodness. So, where are we today? We are in the most desperate moments since independence. Most desperate. Never in the history of Ghana have we come to the point where we have to expend more than 120% of total national revenue on debt servicing, debt repayment, and public sector emoluments. Never in our history. This country is bankrupt. Completely bankrupt. You understand? Now, for those who point to the fact that, inflation has stabilized and so on, for those who like to talk that way, they know, as we all do know, that now our debt obligations have been suspended. We are not paying the debts. So when we start to pay the debts, we may be posting the same figures. And then something has happened last week or this week. Very interesting. And I want to make my point as clear as possible. I, deliberately, sitting here today, I am not taking a stand for the LGBT bill which has been published or passed in Parliament. No, that's not what I'm doing. I am not also making a statement against the bill. But I'm making a statement about lessons we are learning from the debate. And what is the first lesson? The first lesson is that if any government goes to the IMF and comes back and says, look, we presented such a wonderful program, and that is why we have been giving loans and so on, they are lying to us. Because the IMF and the World Bank and the US Embassy so have told us that the only condition is to obey us. If you obey us, we will give you loans. If you do what we want, we will give you loans. I am scandalized. Today in Ghana, that lady, the US ambassador, is obviously more powerful than our president, the president we elected. When our president speaks, she speaks back. She's giving instructions to government. This is what the US wants you to do. You do it or we squeeze you, and our people are shaking. Finance minister, shaking. To the extent that the finance minister now advises his president through a public statement. Hey, what is happening? Because US ambassador has spoken. Finance minister is shaking. He goes to his office, he crafts a public statement advising his president not to sign the bill. He couldn't call the president, he couldn't go to the president to have a discussion with him. He is now like the US ambassador issuing instructions to the president. Yes, sir.
Forget that your president went to sit before the US Secretary of State like a schoolboy, to report that Burkina Faso.
Percy, you can say that. I told you that don't try to turn me into Dr. Percy. I have no such ambition.
Okay.
I have no such. I don't want to be like Dr. Percy. Percy, why? You know, so this is happening. And I asked myself the other day, so the Ghana ambassador to the US, when they killed George Floyd, could he have held a press conference in the United States condemning the United States Security Services for hunting black people? So why does the US ambassador behave differently from our ambassador in Washington? You understand? But it is worse than that. Forget the arrogance of the ambassador and embassy staff and State Department officials who are talking down to our leaders and so on. Forget that. It gets worse. Look, under what circumstances, what thinking went into signing a defense agreement with the US, which states clearly that when US soldiers carry out operations in Ghana and they kill Ghanaians, Ghanaians cannot go to court. What thinking? What thinking went into signing that defense agreement which says that US soldiers can come here and destroy property and we cannot take them to court? What thinking went into signing that agreement which says that Radio Gold has to pay for the use of our frequencies, but the US Army takes it for free? What kind of thinking went into that? What kind of thinking went into signing a defense pact with the US who says that as for American soldiers, when they are coming to Ghana, they don't need passports, they don't need visas. All they need is their US ID card. What kind of thinking went into signing that agreement which says that they are not subject to customs or any inspections on arrival and departure? What kind of thinking went into that? What kind of thinking went into signing an agreement which says that operational bases used by the US, our president has no right to enter them in Ghana? What kind of thinking went into that? What kind of thinking went into that? You see, our current leaders are behaving in manners which suggest that they are actually worse than the house niggers in the slave era. They're worse than the house niggers in the slave era. And the president himself panics. Total panic. Then he goes on his Twitter page and he tells the US ambassador, don't worry, I ain't signing this bill because somebody has taken the matter to court when the person had not even arrived at the hey!
The bill is not even a law.
The guy who is taking the matter to the court, he hasn't even arrived anywhere near Osu. The president is telling the US ambassador, don't worry, I ain't signing this bill, man. Ain't signing this bill. Ain't gonna sign this bill, man. Keep cool. What is this slave mentality? How do we move forward with this kind of slave mentality? You see, so Sana, as I said from the beginning, we are in this mess, not because we have been independent for 67 years. We are in this mess because traitors of the African cause have grabbed power. And they grabbed power from February 24th, 1966. And that is why February 24th will forever remain a day of shame in Ghana's history. That is Ghana's day of shame. Now, what is the task before us? The forces of progress and revolution. What is our task? Our task, first and foremost, is to wrestle power from the incompetent hands of the new colonial agents. First task. We must wrestle power from the incompetent hands, neo-colonial hands. First, our first objective. Second objective is to begin to think as Africans, to begin to fashion out what we need to do as African people, from Cape Town to Addis Ababa, what we need to do as African people in order to enhance our development. And one of the things that we must tackle immediately is to tear down our current borders. These borders have to be torn down. And do you know why these borders have to be torn down? Because these borders are not our creation. As a matter of fact, in 1884, Otto von Bismarck, then Chancellor of Germany, invited other Western leaders to a conference in Bonn. There was no African at this conference. It was only them. Then they put a map of Africa in front of them. Everybody took a long pencil and they began drawing lines on the map. Those are the lines which have today become our borders. And these borders do not make any sense. My brother, take it from me. They don't make any sense at all. You come from the Volta region, Senna. And I suppose you visited the Ghana-Togo border on many occasions. Yes. Now tell me if what I'm going to tell you is false. You go to the Ghana-Togo border and you find one house. The bathroom is in Ghana, the kitchen is in Togo. Am I lying? So how do these borders reflect our reality? You go to the Western region, you see the people of Nzima, the Nzima people, the bulk of them are in Ghana. Their paramount chief is in La Côte d'Ivoire. True or false? These borders have become a huge hindrance to our development, and we need to tear these borders down. Of course, today, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are showing us the way. And our bankrupt, useless leaders are threatening to wage war on them. Do you know why they're threatening to wage war on them? Because that is the example we should be following. They have united. They are building a confederation of Mali, Guinea, Niger. That is what Nkrumah tried before his overthrow. And build a confederation of Ghana, Guinea, Mali. You remember? And recently discovered documents indicate that the Congo was joining the confederation, 4-state confederation. Now, since the coup occurred in Niger, and listen to me well, from one of the 3 poorest countries in the world, Niger has become the fastest growing economy in the world. Instead of the West African leaders going to them saying, how did you do it? Please teach us. They say, no, we are doing something bad, we overthrow you and bring Bazoum back to power. Are you crazy? Are you crazy? So there is hope. A patriotic revolution is taking place in West Africa. Of course, a patriotic revolution can deteriorate very fast. We saw it here in 1979 and 81. No doubt, we saw it here in 1979 81. At the end of it, we became the star pupils of the World Bank and the IMF. At the end of it, we implemented structural adjustment program, denied our people access to health and other social services and so on. So patriotic revolutions can slide, and slide in very dangerous ways. But it is our responsibility to make sure that these patriotic revolutions do not fail. That these patriotic revolutions develop a base of popular support, that they are transformed from coup regimes into popular democratic movements. That's the responsibility of all progressive forces in Africa and the world today. It's our responsibility to ensure that they defeat the insurgents, you understand, who are visiting mayhem on the citizens of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. As for Guinea now, I'm not so sure of where they are going to. I'm not so sure. I would not condemn them, but I'm not so sure of where they are heading. But we need, that's our responsibility now. Then we need to listen to Kwame Nkrumah and make sure that not just Ghana, but the whole of Africa is free of foreign military presence. That's one of the responsibilities. That's one of our charges. We need to make sure that French-speaking Africa does not continue to keep its foreign reserves in the Central Bank of France. And the way to do that is to immediately develop a West African currency and a West African central bank, and to extend that to the whole of Africa. You understand? It's an imperative. The way to do that is for Africans to own their resources and exploit these resources for their benefit. If we are to do these things, we'll be following the original aspirations of the independence movement. And the economy can now turn the corner, not this turning the corner.
Thank you. Thank you.
PENDREAM TV now, so far so good. Say open online portal e Ghana. Nipa share, nipa follow, nipa comment here. To my best of knowledge, without any biases, PENDREAM TV.